The most insane serial killers in history. Today, I'll talk about the craziest serial killers in history. Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer took lives just to become famous. You could say he was one of the first content creators, as he frequently sent letters to the police and media containing details only the killer would know. He also included cryptic messages as a challenge. If anyone cracked them, they would discover his identity. His first known crime was in December 1968 when he killed 2 people on Lake Herman Road, Benicia, California. Over the next year, he continued to kill and mock the authorities. His targets were often young couples in secluded areas, and he carefully planned his crimes to attract as much attention as possible. Police investigations linked him to 5 murders, but according to his own letters, he claimed to have killed 37 people. Whether that number was true or just his way of bragging is unknown, but despite years of investigation and hundreds of suspects, the Zodiac Killer has never been caught. The killer clown, John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy, also known as the Joker, had a wealthy wife. He married the daughter of a KFC restaurant owner and was given a managerial position. On the side, he worked as a magician, often performing tricks for young boys. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 1968, but was released after only 18 months due to good behavior. He moved to Chicago, started a successful construction company, remarried, and even got involved in politics. But instead of showing off on social media, which didn't exist back then, he decided to lure young boys into his trap. According to his confession, his first victim was a homeless teenager he picked up on the street. After taking him home and failing to persuade him, Gacy killed him. Between 1972 and 1978, he lured at least 33 young men into his home and murdered them. Most were buried in his basement. When the basement was full, he dumped the bodies elsewhere. His twisted nature was evident in how he carefully documented his crimes in a diary and kept souvenirs from his victims. For him, killing was just a game. Sometimes he spared his victims, and sometimes he killed them without reason. The truth came to light when police searched his house and found human remains in the basement. In 1980, he was sentenced to death for his crimes. Even in his final moments on the electric chair, he remained arrogant, saying, "My KDA is 33/0/0." Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was quite attractive, probably at the top of the food chain. If Tinder had existed back then, his charm and friendliness would have made him easily gain people's trust. That's why most of his victims were young women. From 1974 to 1978, Bundy killed more than 30 people across different U.S. states. His friendly and trustworthy image meant no one suspected him. His method was to fake an injury or pretend to be a law enforcement officer to lure victims in before killing them. Afterward, he would engage in necrophilia. He even kept the severed heads of at least 12 victims as trophies. One time, he attacked in a crowded outdoor event, leaving too many witnesses. This led the police to sketch his face and identify him as Ted. When his girlfriend saw the sketch on TV, she thought, "Wow, that looks like my boyfriend. And I recently found a stash of women's underwear and knives in his car." Only 2 possibilities. Either he's a weirdo or he's a serial killer. She reported him, but police still lacked enough evidence to arrest him. Later, while hunting for new victims in Colorado, Bundy was caught for a traffic violation. Inside his car, police found suspicious items like ropes, handcuffs, and masks. During his final trial in Florida, Bundy chose to represent himself in court since he had studied law. But he wasn't very good. He lost the case and received 3 death sentences. Jeffrey Dahmer, the cannibal. Jeffrey Dahmer had a habit of eating human flesh and keeping body parts as souvenirs. His childhood wasn't peaceful. His father was always working, and his mother often fought with him. After high school, his parents divorced, and his mother abandoned the family. Perhaps this made him develop a fear of attachment and abandonment. Since childhood, Dahmer enjoyed dissecting animals and collecting their bones. His first victim was a young man named Steven, whom he met at a rock festival. Dahmer invited Steven over for some pool and drinks. Steven agreed, but since he wasn't gay, he left after playing. Dahmer didn't like that. He wanted complete control over his friend, so he killed him. His disturbing nature escalated. After murdering his victims, he dismembered them, kept some body parts as trophies, ate others, and even used some as sex toys. One of his most horrifying acts involved drilling holes into victims' skulls to see if he could turn them into living puppets under his control. Most of his 15 victims were young men of African or immigrant descent, perhaps because authorities at the time paid little attention to these groups. In one shocking incident, a young Laotian boy escaped from Dahmer's apartment after being drilled in the head. He ran into the streets and encountered the police. But when Dahmer arrived and said, "He's my drunk boyfriend," the police believed him and escorted the boy back inside. Dahmer was finally caught in 1991 and sentenced to life in prison. However, another inmate killed him behind bars. Jack the Ripper. This case happened in 1888 in the poor district of Whitechapel, London. Jack the Ripper had only 5 confirmed victims, all prostitutes. However, what made him infamous was the precise surgical incisions on their throats, indicating medical knowledge. At the time, only the wealthy could afford medical training, leading many to believe that Jack the Ripper was highly educated. Some conspiracy theories even suggested he was a vampire or a vengeful spirit. His method was likely hiring prostitutes, making them believe he was just another client, and then killing them. Since there was no mass media, most information spread through rumors, and newspapers exaggerated the events, causing widespread panic. Authorities failed to catch him despite numerous suspects and investigations. To this day, no one knows if Jack the Ripper was a person with poor eyesight or an assassin class lowly. Charles Manson, the cult leader. Charles Manson was the leader of his own cult, known as the Manson family, in the late 1960s. Since there was no live streaming back then, instead of fishing for donations and teaching his followers how to charm women, he preached a philosophy about racial war called helter-skelter. His plan was to carry out high-profile murders and frame black gangs for the crimes. In August 1969, under Manson's orders, members of his cult, mostly young women, brutally murdered actress Sharon Tate, who was pregnant, along with 4 others at her home in Los Angeles. The next night, they killed the married couple Leno and Rosemary LaBianca in their home. They even left a blood-written message at the crime scene that read, "Death to pigs." The word pigs was a reference to the police at the time, but it also seemed like an attempt to redirect suspicion toward street gangs. Manson was later arrested and sentenced to death for conspiracy to commit murder. However, his sentence was eventually reduced to life in prison. The butcher of Plainfield, Ed Gein. Ed Gein, whose real name was Edward Theodore Gein, had a rough childhood. He lived on his family's farm in the small town of Plainfield, Wisconsin. His father was an alcoholic, while his mother was abusive and never allowed him to leave the house except to go to school. She constantly drilled into his mind that the world was evil and that all women were sinful. Wait, wasn't she a woman too? Despite this, Gein was deeply attached to his mother. If you simplify his story, he was kind of like Homelander, just without superpowers. After his mother passed away in 1945, his mental state deteriorated. Unlike Homelander, who might have stored milk in the fridge, Gein decided to make a woman's suit out of human skin to resemble his mother. In 1957, while investigating the disappearance of several women, police searched Gain's home. What they found was beyond disturbing. Not only were his clothes made from human skin, but his furniture was also crafted from body parts. Some of these remains belonged to 2 women he had murdered. On November 21, 1957, Gein was charged with first-degree murder, but was declared legally insane due to schizophrenia and cognitive impairment. He spent the rest of his life in a mental institution. His crimes became so infamous that he later inspired the horror film The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez terrorized California with a series of brutal murders starting in June 1984. His method was to break into victims' homes at night, restrain them, but not kill them immediately. Instead, he tortured, assaulted, and performed satanic rituals before finally killing them. He often left satanic symbols at the crime scenes. His goal wasn't just to kill, it was to inflict suffering on his victims for his own pleasure. Maybe he was just into extreme BDSM. His capture led to one of the largest manhunts in California history, with over 200 detectives involved. In August 1985, a group of East Los Angeles residents recognized him and beat him down before the police arrived to arrest him. By then, he had committed 13 murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. In July 1988, Ramirez stood trial, showing no remorse. As he walked past reporters, he raised his hand to reveal a satanic symbol on his palm. He was sentenced to death, but he died in prison before his execution could take place. The Butcher of Rostov, Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Chikatilo was born in Novoshakhtinsk, Ukraine. In 1970, he became a Russian literature teacher at a school in Novoshakhtinsk. What followed was a horrifying spree of murders and assaults. Between 1978 and 1990, Chikatilo killed at least 53 people. He was arrested once, but was released due to a lack of evidence. He only served 1 year in prison before being set free. It wasn't until November 1990 that he was finally caught. He was later convicted of 42 counts of murder, rape, cannibalism, and even drinking his victim's blood. One reason why it took so long to catch him was that forensic technology at the time was still underdeveloped. Additionally, his victims varied widely in age, ranging from 7 to 32 years old, and included both males and females, making it harder to track a pattern. Like and subscribe for more.